There was a time when Richard Collins, a self-made businessman, was celebrated as one of the wealthiest men in the country. His empire stretched across luxury hotels, real estate, and high-end fashion. People looked at him and thought he had it all. But behind the gates of his mansion was a story so painful, so tragic, that it could break even the strongest heart. Richard wasn't born rich. His father, Robert Collins, was a retired schoolteacher, and his mother, Margaret Collins, was a simple homemaker. They lived in a small suburban house and worked day and night to raise Richard with strong values, discipline, and faith in hard work. Robert and Margaret never dreamed of wealth. All they wanted was their son's happiness. They invested every penny into his education, supporting him with prayers and sacrifice. Richard grew ambitious. Through relentless effort, late nights, and smart investments, he built a company from scratch. Within a decade, he was a billionaire. With success came the spotlight, and soon Richard married a stunning young woman named Vanessa. Vanessa was stylish, modern, and ambitious. But unlike Richard's parents, she believed life was meant only for luxury, status, and power. From day one, there was a clash between Vanessa's glittering world and the quiet, humble lives of Robert and Margaret. One evening, just days after the wedding, Margaret entered the grand living room of the Collins estate. Vanessa was trying on an expensive designer dress in front of the mirror. Margaret smiled warmly. "Sweetheart, would you like me to prepare dinner tonight? You must be tired after all the wedding events." Vanessa rolled her eyes. "Margaret, I'm not a housewife who cooks and cleans. We have staff for that. I'm Richard's wife now. People expect me to live like it. Please understand, I'm not going to play the role of a simple homemaker." Margaret's smile faded. She quietly left, her heart sinking down as months passed. Vanessa grew colder toward her in-laws. To her, they were an obstacle, old-fashioned, unsophisticated, and a reminder of Richard's modest past. One evening, Vanessa confronted Richard directly. "Richard, every time I host a dinner party, people ask why your parents still live with us. They think it's outdated. We're billionaires. We need freedom, not old traditions holding us back. It's embarrassing." Richard stared at her in shock. "Vanessa, what are you saying? They're my parents. They raised me, gave me everything I have. I can't just throw them out." Vanessa's voice turned sharp. "Then choose. Either you live like a successful billionaire with me, or you stay a little boy clinging to his parents. You can't have both." The pressure was relentless. One morning, Robert and Margaret were sitting in the mansion's living room, quietly reading the newspaper. Vanessa walked in with a cold expression. "You don't need to leave," she said bluntly. "This is not your home anymore. Richard and I have our own life to live, and you don't fit in here. The car is waiting outside. Take your things and go." Margaret gasped. "Vanessa, how can you say that? This house, this family." Vanessa cut her off. "Enough. Pack your bags. I don't want to see you here again." Robert tried to keep his voice calm, though his hands trembled. "We'll go. We don't want to cause trouble. But remember, Vanessa, no empire built on disrespect ever lasts." Tears streamed down Margaret's face as she and Robert carried their suitcases out of the mansion. Richard stood frozen by the stairs, unable to stop his wife, unable to defend his parents. Vanessa watched from the doorway with a smile of satisfaction. For her, it was victory. For Robert and Margaret, it was the deepest wound of their lives, freed from her in-laws. Vanessa embraced her dream life. Lavish parties, endless shopping trips, vacations in Europe, and an image of being the perfect billionaire's wife. Soon, she and Richard had 2 children, a son, Ethan, and a daughter, Chloe. But Vanessa raised them the way she believed life should be lived, selfish, entitled, and independent of anyone's influence. She told them again and again, never let anyone control your freedom, not even family. Ethan and Chloe grew up distant from their grandparents. They were taught to see Robert and Margaret as outsiders who had no place in their glamorous world. Years passed. Richard's business flourished, but inside the Collins household, love was scarce. Respect, humility, and warmth, the very values Robert and Margaret had built their lives on, were missing. Vanessa thought she had created the perfect life. She had no idea that the very seeds she was planting in her children would one day destroy her. Ethan, now in his 20s, returned home one evening. Vanessa was waiting with a smile, but his words crushed her. "Mom, Dad," Ethan said firmly, his tone cold, "you're old now. You don't understand the world we live in. Chloe and I need our own space, our freedom. It's time for you both to step aside. You should move out. Vanessa froze. Her breath caught in her throat. Those words, they were the exact words she had once spoken to Robert and Margaret. Her victory from years ago had turned into her punishment. Vanessa sat silently in her bedroom after Ethan's words. Her hands trembled as she replayed the moment in her mind. Years ago, she had stood in the same place with the same cold tone and thrown her husband's parents out of their home. Now her own son had done the same to her. Richard walked in slowly, his face pale. "Vanessa, he sounded just like you did back then," she snapped back, defensive. "Don't blame me for this, Richard. You could have stopped him. You could have told him no." Richard shook his head. "I tried to tell you all those years ago that the way we treat family matters. But you insisted. You wanted freedom. You wanted this life." Vanessa buried her face in her hands, but she refused to cry. "There are children. They don't mean it. They're just young. They'll understand later." But the truth was, Ethan and Chloe had grown into exactly what Vanessa had molded them to be: entitled, ungrateful, and cold. The very next week, Ethan came to Vanessa again. "Mom, Chloe and I have decided we don't want to live with you anymore. It's not good for our image. Our friends think it's strange that we're still under the same roof as our parents. You and Dad need to move out." Vanessa stared at him in disbelief. "Ethan, how dare you talk to me like this? After everything I've given you? The money, the cars, the vacations, the best schools." Ethan folded his arms. "And we're thankful, but it's our turn now. We don't want you controlling our lives. Isn't that what you always taught us? Never let anyone control your freedom?" "We learned that from you, Mom." The words stabbed Vanessa like knives. She had repeated that lesson to them countless times, proud of teaching them independence. Now those same words were being used to push her away. Richard tried to reason with his children. "Ethan, Chloe, we're your parents. This house, everything we own is for you. But don't treat us like strangers. Family is not something you throw away when it doesn't suit you." Chloe rolled her eyes. "Dad, please. We don't need lectures. We know how to handle our lives. You and Mom had your time. Now let us have ours." Days turned into weeks, and the tension in the mansion grew unbearable. Vanessa began to feel like a guest in her own home. Her children stopped inviting her to their gatherings. They laughed and joked with friends in the living room while she and Richard sat alone upstairs, forgotten. One night, Richard came into the bedroom with tears in his eyes. "Vanessa, do you remember the night your words drove my parents out of this house? I stood by the stairs, frozen, watching you order them to leave. Tonight, I felt the same way standing there while our own kids treated us like we don't matter." Vanessa's lips trembled, but she whispered stubbornly, "No, they'll change. They're just confused." But deep down, she knew the truth. She had built this reality with her own hands. The final blow came on a cold winter morning. Ethan walked into the dining room, a legal envelope in his hand. He dropped it on the table in front of Vanessa and Richard. "We've made a decision," he said flatly. "The house is under our names now. You and Dad will have to leave. We've arranged a smaller place for you. It's best for everyone." Vanessa's heart stopped. Her own son, her flesh and blood, was evicting her just as she had once evicted Robert and Margaret. She stood up, her voice shaking. "Ethan, Chloe, please, don't do this. This mansion is my home. I've given everything to you both. Don't throw us away like trash." Chloe looked at her coldly. "Mom, stop being dramatic. We're not throwing you away. You'll still have a roof over your head. Just not here. We need our own life, and you need to let go." Vanessa staggered back, clutching the chair for support. For the first time in her life, she felt powerless. Richard placed a hand on her shoulder. "Vanessa, this is what happens when respect isn't taught. We thought money could replace love, but it can't. My parents warned us. Do you remember Robert's words? No empire built on disrespect ever lasts. This is the price." Vanessa's tears finally fell. She remembered that day, years ago, when she had stood proud as Robert and Margaret walked out with their suitcases. She had smiled then, thinking she had won. But now, as she faced the same fate, there was no victory, only pain. That evening, the billionaire couple packed their bags in silence. The once grand Collins mansion echoed with laughter, but it wasn't theirs. Vanessa paused at the doorway, looking around one last time. The chandeliers, the marble floors, the priceless paintings, none of it mattered anymore. She realized all the wealth in the world couldn't buy back the love she had lost. As she and Richard walked down the front steps with their suitcases, Just as Robert and Margaret had once done, Vanessa whispered, "I never thought this day would come. I never thought my own children would do this to me." Richard sighed. "Neither did my parents. But we repeated the cycle, and now we live with the consequences." Vanessa lowered her head, broken, as the car door closed behind them. The new house was nothing like the mansion. It wasn't small by ordinary standards, but for Vanessa it felt like a prison. The grand hallways, the chandeliers, the gardens filled with roses and fountains all gone. What remained was silence and an emptiness that haunted her every day. She wandered through the living room, staring at the plain white walls. "I can't believe this is happening," she muttered. "After everything I've done, after all the sacrifices, my own children have thrown me out." Richard, sitting quietly on the couch, said nothing at first. He just looked at her with tired eyes. Finally, he spoke. "Vanessa, they're only doing what you once did. You taught them to live without considering family. You showed them by example." His words stung her more than anything Ethan or Chloe had said. Vanessa wanted to argue, but she knew he was right. The image of Robert and Margaret leaving their home years ago kept flashing in her mind. She had stood tall then, proud and defiant, as she kicked them out. Now, for the first time, she understood what they must have felt: the humiliation, the heartbreak, the betrayal. But Vanessa was not ready to admit it out loud. Instead, she snapped, "I only wanted the best for our family. I wanted them to live like billionaires, not like some small-town family with outdated values." Richard's voice hardened. "And in doing that, you destroyed the very values that hold a family together. Money can't replace love. Freedom doesn't mean disrespect. You wanted control, Vanessa, and now we've lost everything that truly mattered." Vanessa turned away, tears filling her eyes. For years she had refused to cry, but now, sitting in that empty house, the weight of her choices crushed her. Weeks passed. Vanessa tried calling Ethan and Chloe, but they rarely answered. When they did, their voices were cold, distant, and filled with excuses. "We're busy, Mom. Don't worry. You're finding your place. We'll visit soon." But they never came. Birthdays, anniversaries, even holidays passed without a single call. One evening, Vanessa sat at the kitchen table, staring at her phone. "They've forgotten us, Richard," she whispered. "We're nothing to them now." Richard placed a comforting hand on hers. "This is the life we created, Vanessa. We didn't just lose them overnight. It happened slowly, over years, and we refused to see it. We taught them selfishness by living it ourselves." Vanessa clenched her fists. "I didn't want this. I only wanted respect. I wanted people to see us as powerful, untouchable. And what did that respect give you?" Richard asked softly. "Look around. Do you see anyone here? Do you hear laughter or love? We're alone, Vanessa, alone. Just like my parents warned us." The silence of the house was unbearable. Every creak of the floor, every tick of the clock echoed like a reminder of her mistakes. Months turned into a year. Ethan and Chloe had completely taken over the mansion. They threw extravagant parties, inviting hundreds of friends, influencers, and celebrities. The once respected Collins household was now known as a playground for spoiled heirs. Neighbors whispered about the wild nights, the reckless spending, the chaos. But Ethan and Chloe didn't care. They flaunted their wealth like it was endless, blind to the reality that their empire was beginning to crumble under mismanagement. Meanwhile, Richard and Vanessa lived quietly, almost forgotten. The press no longer chased them for interviews. Friends who once begged to be at their parties now avoided them. Without the mansion, without the constant show of wealth, Vanessa realized how shallow those friendships had been. One rainy evening, Vanessa stood by the window, watching drops slide down the glass. "Richard," she said in a broken voice, "do you think Ethan and Chloe love us? Or was it always just about what we gave them?" Richard sighed deeply. "I think they love themselves more than they'll ever love anyone else. And maybe that's our fault. We gave them everything except the one thing they needed most: humility." Vanessa finally broke down. Tears poured down her face as she sank to the floor. "I was wrong. I was so wrong. I thought I was building a perfect life, but all I did was destroy it. I turned them into this." Richard knelt beside her, holding her close. "It's too late for regrets, Vanessa. We can't change the past, but maybe, just maybe, life will teach them the same lesson it taught you. And when that happens, we'll know the cycle is complete." His words lingered in the air like a prophecy. That night, Vanessa lay awake in bed, Haunted by memories, she remembered Margaret's face the day she pushed her out. The tears, the heartbreak, the silent strength in Robert's voice when he said, "No empire built on disrespect ever lasts." Now she lived those very words, and for the first time, she wished she could turn back time, fall to her knees, and beg Margaret for forgiveness, but it was too late. Ethan leaned back in the velvet armchair of the Collins mansion, a glass of champagne in his hand. Laughter filled the room. Music thumped against the walls. Beautiful strangers danced under the chandeliers his father had once polished with pride. The mansion was no longer a home. It was a nightclub, a playground for the spoiled and the reckless. Ethan thrived in the chaos. Chloe, dressed in a glittering gown, raised her glass from across the room and shouted over the music to us, the kings and queens of Collins Mansion. The crowd cheered. Phones flashed as guests live-streamed the party to thousands of followers. To outsiders, Ethan and Chloe were living the dream: wealth, fame, and endless freedom. But behind the glitter, cracks were already spreading. Bills piled up unnoticed. Investments went unmanaged. Richard's once thriving companies faltered under Ethan's careless leadership. He skipped board meetings, ignored advisors, and spent fortunes on cars, vacations, and parties. Chloe was no better, showering money on designer clothes, fake friends, and shallow romances. One evening, after yet another wild night, Ethan sat at the dining table, flipping through documents carelessly. His financial advisor, Mr. Dalton, cleared his throat nervously. "Mr. Collins, we have a serious problem. If you continue at this pace, your accounts will be drained within a year. The companies are struggling. You need to cut expenses, refocus," and Ethan waved his hand dismissively. "Don't bore me with numbers, Dalton. My father built this empire. It can't fall. Just move some funds around, sell some assets. I want to enjoy life, not sit at boardrooms." Chloe entered the room, laughing with a group of friends. "Ethan, ignore him. We're young. This is our time. Dad wasted his life working. Look where that got him. Let's not repeat his mistakes." Dalton tried once more. "If you don't act now, you'll lose everything. Wealth doesn't last forever." Ethan's face darkened. "Are you threatening me, Dalton? Maybe I should find a new advisor. Someone who doesn't kill the mood with bad news." Dalton sighed. He knew it was pointless. "I'll do what I can," he muttered before leaving, but the spiral had already begun. Months later, Ethan stood outside the mansion, staring at a group of bankers who had arrived in black suits. Their voices were stern, their warnings sharp. Chloe's face turned pale when she heard the word foreclosure. "This can't be happening," Ethan whispered. "We're the Collins family. We don't lose." The bankers exchanged glances. "Mr. Collins, your family name doesn't pay debts. Your lifestyle is unsustainable. Unless immediate payments are made, your assets will be seized." Inside, Chloe threw a glass against the wall, shattering it into pieces. "How could you let this happen, Ethan? You said everything was fine." Ethan slammed his fist on the table. "Don't blame me. You've been spending just as recklessly. Do you know how much your stupid parties cost?" Their voices echoed through the empty halls. For the first time, the mansion felt cold, almost hostile. Meanwhile, their so-called friends began to disappear. Invitations stopped coming. Phones went silent. The same people who had cheered with them under the chandeliers now whispered behind their backs. Without endless money to burn, Ethan and Chloe were no longer interesting. One night, Ethan walked into the living room to find Chloe sitting alone, scrolling through her phone. "Where is everyone?" he asked. She didn't look up. "They're gone. Nobody cares about us anymore." Ethan's chest tightened. He thought of his parents, sitting in that smaller house, forgotten. For the first time, he felt a flicker of guilt, but he pushed it away. "We'll fix this. We'll bounce back." But things only got worse. Lawyers knocked on their door. Cars were repossessed. Staff who had once bowed at their feet now left quietly, their paychecks unpaid. The Collins siblings, once the rulers of a glittering empire, were slowly drowning in debt. One evening, Chloe sat by the grand staircase, her head in her hands. "Ethan, what if we lose the mansion?" He froze. The thought had never truly entered his mind. This mansion wasn't just a house, it was their identity, their throne. Without it, they were nothing, but the walls were closing in at the same time. Richard and Vanessa lived quietly in their modest home. They had little money, little luxury, but at least they had each other. Richard still took walks every morning, and Vanessa tried to busy herself with simple tasks. though her mind never strayed far from their children. One night, as she washed dishes in the small kitchen, Vanessa paused. She had heard whispers and town rumors of her children's reckless lifestyle, the collapsing businesses, the debt. She tried to dismiss them, but a deep ache filled her chest. "Richard," she whispered as he sat reading by the lamp, "do you think it's true? Do you think Ethan and Chloe are falling?" Richard looked at her, his eyes filled with quiet sorrow. Life has a way of teaching lessons that pride refuses to learn. If it's true, then maybe it's the only way they'll understand. Vanessa sank into a chair, her hands trembling. "I wanted them to have everything. How did it come to this?" Richard's voice was steady, almost resigned. "Because we gave them everything but love, and now they are learning the cost." Back at the mansion, Ethan stood alone in the grand hallway, staring at the portraits of his parents and grandparents. For the first time, he felt small. The house echoed with emptiness, the laughter gone, the music silent. The once glittering Collins mansion stood in eerie silence. The chandeliers no longer sparkled. The marble floors were covered in dust. Gone were the glamorous parties, the flashing lights, the endless laughter of shallow friends. Only echoes remained, bouncing through empty halls like ghosts of a life that had vanished. Ethan paced the living room, his hair unkempt, his shirt wrinkled. The confident smile that once charmed everyone was long gone. His phone buzzed on the coffee table. Another bank notice, another demand for payment he could no longer make. Chloe sat on the staircase, her mascara smudged from crying. "Ethan, they said we have 1 week. 1 week before they take the mansion. What are we going to do?" Ethan clenched his fists. "This is our house. They can't take it. We're the Collins family. We don't lose." But the words sounded empty, even to him. The very next day, black cars pulled up to the mansion. Lawyers and bankers stepped out, their briefcases heavy with documents. The staff, who remained just 2 maids, and an old driver, watched silently as strangers walked through the front doors. Like they owned the place, Ethan tried to argue. "You can't just take our home." One of the lawyers handed him a thick envelope. "Mr. Collins, this property is no longer yours. You've defaulted on every payment. The banks have seized ownership. You and your sister need to vacate immediately." Chloe's voice cracked. "But where will we go? This is our home." The lawyer's tone was cold. "That is no longer your concern." Reality hit them like a thunderclap. Just as Vanessa once forced Robert and Margaret down these very stairs with their suitcases, Ethan and Chloe now stood in the same place, helpless, broken, humiliated. Neighbors gathered outside, whispering. Phones recorded as the heirs of the Collins fortune carried their belongings into the driveway. The same people who once envied them now watched with cruel satisfaction. Chloe sobbed, clutching her designer bag. "This can't be real. It's like a nightmare." Ethan's eyes burned as he looked up at the grand mansion one last time. He remembered the day he and Chloe told their parents to leave. How proud he had felt taking control. Now the house rejected him too, spitting him out like unwanted trash. They left in silence, their car stuffed with clothes and boxes. No friends came to help. No one called to check on them. The glittering crowd that once filled their lives had vanished. Meanwhile, in the modest little house across town, Vanessa stood by the window as rain tapped softly against the glass. She gasped when she saw a familiar car pull up outside. Ethan and Chloe stepped out, drenched, carrying suitcases, her heart twisted. She hadn't seen them in months, not since the night they threw her and Richard out. For a moment, she thought it was a dream. Chloe knocked weakly at the door. Vanessa opened it, her breath caught in her throat. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice trembling. Ethan lowered his head, his pride gone. "Mom, we lost everything. The mansion, the money, the business. It's all gone." Chloe burst into tears. "We have nowhere else to go. Can we stay here?" Vanessa froze. In an instant, she saw Margaret's face, the day she had begged to stay. The day Vanessa had slammed the door in her face. Now the roles were reversed. Fate had come full circle. Richard appeared behind Vanessa, his expression unreadable. "What do we do, Vanessa?" he asked softly. Vanessa's hand shook. Part of her wanted to scream, to tell them to leave, to remind them of the pain they had caused. But another part of her, the part that had finally learned humility, knew this was the moment to break the cycle. She stepped aside. "Come in," she whispered. Ethan and Chloe looked stunned. Slowly, they entered the small home, their designer clothes dripping onto the modest floor. The luxury they had once taken for granted was gone. All that remained was the shelter of the parents they had betrayed. Later that night, as they sat around the small kitchen table, silence filled the air. Finally, Chloe whispered, "Mom, Dad, we're sorry. We didn't realize. We didn't understand until now. We treated you the way you once treated Grandpa and Grandma. And now, it's all come back to us." Tears filled Vanessa's eyes. She reached across the table and held her daughter's hand. "I know, and maybe this is the only way we could all learn. But remember this: money, mansions, power. None of it matters if you don't have love and respect." Ethan lowered his head. "We see that now. We were wrong." Richard spoke quietly, but firmly. "The Collins name doesn't need another empire of money. It needs an empire of values. If you truly want to change, it starts here at this table. With humility, with respect. For the first time in years, the Collins family sat together, not as billionaires or heirs, but as people broken, humble, and finally willing to heal. The cycle had ended, and in that small, ordinary home, they began to rebuild not with wealth, but with love. The first few weeks were difficult. Ethan and Chloe struggled to adjust to the small house. They complained about the lack of space, the simple furniture, the absence of luxury. But slowly, reality sank in. The grandeur they once flaunted was gone, and all they had left was their parents' forgiveness. One morning, Chloe stood in the kitchen, trying to make breakfast. She burned the toast, spilled the milk, and nearly dropped a pan. Vanessa, who watched from the doorway, almost laughed. Years ago, Chloe had never stepped foot in the kitchen. Everything had been handed to her on a silver platter. Now, she was learning. "Here," Vanessa said gently, stepping forward. She took the spatula from Chloe's hands. "You flip it like this. Slow, steady." Chloe smiled faintly. "Thanks, Mom. I wish I had let you teach me sooner." Vanessa's heart softened. She touched her daughter's cheek. "It's never too late." Ethan, too, changed. He took odd jobs to help with expenses, something unimaginable for the heir of a billionaire empire. The first day he came home sweaty and tired, Vanessa stared at him in disbelief. "You worked?" she asked. Ethan dropped onto the couch, exhausted. "Yeah, it's not glamorous, but it feels different. Feels real." Richard, sitting nearby, nodded with quiet pride. "Work has a way of humbling you. Maybe it's what you needed." As months passed, the bitterness began to fade. Family dinners returned, not grand feasts with chefs and servants, but simple meals shared with laughter. For the first time, they weren't trying to impress anyone. They were simply together. One evening, Ethan set his fork down and looked at his parents. "I used to think you both were old-fashioned, that love and respect were outdated. But when we lost everything, the only people who stayed were you. Not a single friend, not one of those people we threw parties for, just you. And I'll never forget that." Chloe added softly, "I thought freedom meant pushing people away. Now I know it means holding on to the ones who matter." Vanessa's eyes welled with tears. She had waited years to hear words like these. Slowly, she smiled. "I made terrible mistakes. I thought money made us strong, but it only made us weak. I thought respect came from power, but it comes from love. I pushed my in-laws out, and I lost myself in the process. When you pushed us out, I finally understood the pain I caused. I can't undo the past, but I can make sure the future is different." Richard reached across the table, his hand covering Vanessa's, and that's all that matters. The family held hands in silence, the weight of generations resting on them. For once, there were no chandeliers, no photographers, no flashing lights, just the soft glow of a kitchen bulb and the warmth of forgiveness. Years later, the Collins family wasn't known for their billions anymore. The mansion was gone, the companies dissolved, but those who knew them spoke of something greater, that they had survived betrayal, loss, and humiliation, and had rebuilt a family stronger than wealth could ever buy. One day, Vanessa visited the cemetery where Robert and Margaret rested. She knelt by their grave, tears streaming down her face. "I was wrong," she whispered. "I didn't understand then, but I do now. You warned us. You tried to show us the right way. I didn't listen, but your words lived on, even when I ignored them. No empire built on disrespect ever lasts. I see that now. I'm sorry, truly sorry." The wind rustled the trees, and for a moment, she felt as though Margaret's gentle hand touched her shoulder, forgiving her. As she walked back to Richard, Ethan, and Chloe, who waited by the car, Vanessa realized something she had never felt before: peace. The Collins family no longer had wealth, But they had finally found something more valuable, each other. And this time, they vowed never to lose it again.